We went into this journey with the benefit of having known one another for a long time. That was definitely a good start because we had a lot of bumps along the way. I think the desire to have children is so deeply ingrained in so many of us that it's a very difficult thing to contend with when there are barriers to it. There are so many things, as Alexa was pointing out, where whether they lead to the outcome that you want is not clear at all. One of the things that we had to figure out was how we both deal with uncertainty and how we deal with the idea of this thing that we both want, but we don't know how to get there.
I started to shift to having more success envisioning a baby with donor eggs than with my own eggs. And it isn't that I didn't hope that, like, I obviously hoped it would work. We did those transfers. I didn't want them to fail, but I had trouble envisioning those embryos becoming a baby. And with donor eggs, it felt much more possible. And so that started to really shift.
Welcome to my fertility podcast, Superhumans, the show that brings you expert insights, personal stories, and the latest in fertility care, all in one place.
Whether you're starting your fertility journey, navigating challenges, or just exploring your options, we're here to empower you with knowledge, support, and hope.
Join us as we dive deep into topics that matter most, from IVF and fertility treatments to mental health and wellness.
I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise. We're two of the fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Centre in Markham, Ontario, Canada. Think of us as your sisters in all things fertility. Let's demystify the world of fertility together. On today's episode of My Fertility Podcast, we are welcoming Alexa and Kevin to our show to talk about their 6-year fertility journey. Kevin is an accomplished composer of classical music whose works have been played and broadcast around the world. He's also an aspiring writer. Alexa is a former professional violinist who now teaches Pilates. They have welcomed a baby boy about 1 year ago to the world, and we congratulate them and send them big hugs. 4 months after giving birth to their son, Robin, they embarked on yet another journey, one in which Alexa donated part of her liver to save Robin's life, and we'll speak about this today as well.
Welcome, Alexa and Kevin. I have had the honor and privilege of being your doctor and being a witness to your incredible fertility journey. And I am so delighted that you have agreed to share that journey with our audience. I know this is going to be a great conversation, and you and I have had lots of private conversations about your journey. So I know our audience is going to get a lot out of this today. So thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you for having us. It's so nice to see you and to be here to chat.
It's a pleasure, yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself, about your fertility journey, and how you ended up being here today.
Yeah, I mean, we have a classic love story. We met as kids, really. We met at summer music camp, and I played the violin, Kevin played the piano, and it was a summer camp in London, Ontario. And actually, Kevin was interested romantically in my roommate, but very fortunately for me, my roommate was there to get better at violin, and I was there to have a good time. So he would come and pay a visit.
My kind of friend, yeah.
We'd come to pay a visit, and my roommate would be practicing, but I was there. So we ended up hanging out a lot. Then we were like, 14 and 16 maybe? Something like that. So we didn't date then. We were friends for a long time. We had the classic will they or won't they in our early 20s. We broke up. We made up. It was very dramatic. We're artists. So yeah. But in our mid to late 20s, we settled down. We got together in 2012, and we've been together ever since. Yeah.
Wow, that's one part of the story I didn't know. And here I am thinking I was an expert on your story. That part I didn't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, they always talk about before you get married, talk about if you want to have kids. And we actually never had that conversation because we both knew we wanted kids. So it was really important to both of us. So we talked about how many kids and maybe when, but we didn't talk about yes or no. And so I think that it was, my parents had struggled with infertility. We're both only children. So I think it was always, I don't know if it was as present for you, but it was very present for me. My parents had been married for 18 years before I was born. They struggled for over a decade to have me. So it was something I was always aware of. And I was always a little worried that I might struggle with it too. So I thought I was being really proactive. When we were engaged, I actually went to my family doctor and I said, can you test my fertility? I didn't know anything about that at that point. It's like, can you test this? And they did some blood tests and they said, well, it looks fine. And I thought, okay, this is great. I checked this box. I'm so glad I addressed this. It's not going to be a problem for us. And I feel like we should have known because we were very cavalier with safe sex and we didn't have any accidents or even close to. So we probably should have known that maybe something was up, but we tried immediately after we got married to have a baby and it didn't happen. And then it was kind of that classic, like, well, maybe I should pay attention to when my period comes. Maybe I'll start tracking it. And maybe I'll start tracking my ovulation symptoms and maybe I'll start buying those tests at home. And it just kind of escalated to the point where we were like, okay, I think we should get this tested formally. And so we went to a fertility clinic and it was the classic case of not the right fit. We ended up going to 3 fertility clinics. We had 4 fertility specialists before we ended up at Markham Fertility. And so this first doctor, it was, I'm sure he was a good doctor. And I actually think back now and I think his plan was fine, but the delivery was really hard to hear. I don't know if you want to talk about that. I think it almost turned us off fertility treatments because it was very aggressive. It didn't feel very personalized. And I found that he wouldn't answer any of our questions. And I sort of wanted to know, like, why would we do this test? And why would we do this treatment? And he just said, well, you need it, that kind of thing. And I said, well, maybe we could start with an IUI or maybe we could start with some cycle monitoring. He said, oh, that's never going to work. You need to go right into these other treatments. And I think it was really hard for us to hear. So actually we ended up delaying formally starting treatments because we were so put off by the prospect of, exploratory surgeries and big procedures that weren't really explained to us. And so, eventually we did go to a different clinic and we did sort of start down the road of IVF.
I think you summed it up really beautifully. We had sort of experience upon experience that was pretty negative before coming to Markham Fertility. And I think they were negative for all sorts of reasons, but the main one being, I think, communication and transparency. And so the second clinic that we ended up at was a place where we didn't feel comfortable asking questions and we were given huge contracts to sign. It without really any sort of preparation or guidance. And what we sort of thought of in hindsight as this great deal of external pressure, I think, to actually do these very invasive treatments. And the kind of pressure that I think is very easy to succumb to because you have this dream in mind and without much knowledge, you feel as though this is the only thing that will bring you closer to there. Long story short, it did not. And I think Alexa actually, during a very sort of depressing period of our experience, she actually found you online on your YouTube channel.
It was during
Dr.
the
Garcia.
pandemic. Yeah.
And that's how we kind of ended up at Markham Fertility.
At this point, we had done 2 rounds of IVF and it was extremely expensive at this clinic. And it was this kind of, I don't know, but I had the feeling that everybody got the same protocol. Like when I would compare it to other people at that clinic, they say, oh, I did that too. And we sort of had different problems and they could never give us an answer. So we did our first round of IVF and I thought, oh, this is so great. I'm going to have a baby. I'm so excited. I think they said, oh yeah, you have a really good chance of this working 70% or something. And we retrieved 6 eggs. And I thought, well, that's a little lower than they had been leading us to believe. And they didn't sort of tell us anything about monitoring. So we were injecting these drugs. We would go for these appointments. They just said, oh, everything's looking great. And so we got these 6 eggs. And then we got the call that one of them was mature and it didn't fertilize. And I was just devastated. Wow. Like I didn't know that this was a possibility. I was so devastated. And then I think the doctor mentioned, I think she actually might have mentioned donor eggs at that point. And I thought, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't need this. And so it was a really interesting exercise. I think the right information at the wrong time, I think it probably was an avenue that we needed to explore, but it was just the way that it was kind of brought to us that it felt very offensive to me at the time. Actually, I felt like she really wasn't listening to what I wanted. So we did another round of IVF and that one was actually covered by the government. So that felt a little less of a financial burden and it did better. We got 5 eggs and 3 of them turned into embryos. And we thought, okay, this is great. We're going to send them off for testing. And one of them came back normal and we did the transfer and I just knew it had worked. That was where they said we had 70% chance of success. And I thought, okay, this is wonderful. And I took a pregnancy test 6 days after that transfer and it was negative. And I actually took the pregnancy test apart because I thought it was broken. I was so sure that I was pregnant. I was like, this can't be right. And so then I took, more tests and it was negative and I was so devastated. I emailed the doctor and I said, can you please meet with us? Can you tell us what you think happened? And we had to wait 5 weeks to speak with the doctor to talk about what had gone wrong. And it was, the pandemic. It was not the height of the pandemic. It was sort of May 2020. I was so depressed. I looked online and I found you. It was a YouTube interview, Dr. Garcia, that you were doing, I cannot remember with who, but you were talking about your own infertility experience. You were
Right.
talking about how, you had, as a doctor, you had these difficult conversations. And sometimes, as a patient, you didn't feel listened to. And I thought, this is it. I went into the kitchen and I said, Kevin, we need to get this doctor to be our doctor. So we wrote to the clinic, and it was good luck that you had an opening and we were able to start treatments with you pretty soon after. And then, then it was sort of a more complicated road with more
Yes.
treatments, down the path of, we tried a few more rounds with my eggs. We tried a lot of other therapies. We added some immune therapy. We did no protocols. I mean, you're wonderful in exhausting all the possibilities. And then we eventually did decide to move to donor eggs. And then our whole journey just really changed. And that's how we had our son, Robin.
That's quite something. And there was a lot of pieces there that I actually didn't know. Like, I didn't realize that that was a YouTube interview that had led you to me and all of those things. I have a lot of patients like you, and it's always interesting to hear their perspectives and their journeys. I learn a lot as a doctor when I hear those stories too, because I always say when I get second opinions and third opinions and fourth opinions, I almost have a bit of an advantage over that first, second, and third doctor because I have the context of the entire story. That first doctor didn't have that, and I get to have all of that experience and use that to your benefit. So it's a little bit of an unfair advantage there. But I think that the take home message is that at the end of the day, like you said something about the fit, right? And the fit has to be right. I don't believe there's good doctors and bad doctors. Obviously, there are exceptions. There are truly bad doctors. But I would say, like, the majority of doctors, at least in the fertility space, let's say in Toronto, which I happen to know all of them, are really good doctors, but it's just a question of delivery and the timing of delivery. And again, having that experience with patients as they go through their journey.
And along those lines, I think one of the things that really struck me about your story was that you said that you were so put off by what the first fertility doctor said, how they delivered that information, that you delayed fertility treatment, or that you were almost like put off on doing the whole thing. And actually, I have to say, I hear that a lot. The patients will see someone, they'll get some sort of information, whatever, something is explained to them, and then they're put off. They take like a long break and a long pause. And as we all know, in the world of fertility, time is very often of the essence. So what would you say to a patient who's listening, or someone who comes to you and who sort of says, you know what, I found out this information, I'm worried about my fertility, but I'm just over it. Like, I don't want to do it. How would you address that? Or how would you talk about it? And how would you encourage someone potentially maybe to switch clinics? Because a lot of people, I'm not sure what the word is, but are anxious about doing that or feel some sort of
Sense of
responsibility.
betrayal. Yeah.
Yeah, but yet they also don't want to go back. And so it's like easier just to kind of like hide and sort of step back. If you were talking to a patient, what would you say?
I have thought about this a lot, and I've actually
Exactly,
had this conversation with many other patients or many other women considering donor eggs. And so for me, I always ask, what's your relationship like with your doctor? And it's always a red flag to me if they say, well, I've never talked to my doctor. And that sounds shocking, but actually I hear that a lot. I've never actually had a conversation with my doctor. They've told me I need donor eggs, but I haven't spoken in person. And so if their doctor is difficult to get a hold of, if they're finding that, they're leaving a lot of messages and not getting a lot of responses, then I say, well, how does that make you feel? Does that feel like a thing you'd like to change? And I think something that we have discussed a lot is that we grew up extremely lucky to have good health. And so we didn't have a lot of experience with the medical system. And so our experience was very peripheral with a family doctor. And so when I got a fertility doctor, I just thought, oh, this is the doctor you get. You can't change. This is what it's like. And then I learned, of course, later on that because fertility is mostly not covered, that you actually have a lot of choice and you can take the steps to change. I mean, even if you ask for a referral from your family doctor, you can actually go with a name to your family doctor. You can say, I would like to be referred to this doctor, to this clinic. And I didn't know that. So I think that sometimes having a plan as a patient, you can sort of look up, maybe if there's a doctor that you like who's speaking online. I found Dr. Garcia online. If you say, I want to try this out. And I think the other thing too, that's really important to remember, I think you spoke to it well, actually. All doctors, they have passed the test and it takes a long time to become a doctor. They're all good, but they're not all the right doctor for you. And so They are professionals. They will not take it personally if you leave. I think a lot of people actually worry about retaliatory. They'll say, oh, I'm going to be labeled a bad patient. This clinic is going to talk to me about other clinics. And I say, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you're not that important. They're not going to do that. You will find a clinic where you are important, and you can switch as many times as you need to. And you can get a second opinion. You can get a third opinion. And I think that it's very hard. It's easy to say now, of course. It's very hard to do when you're exhausted and you're having to kind of front load all of this research. But if your questions are not being answered, if you feel that you're not being listened to, I think that you can explore, and you can also sort of without guilt, you can ask for a change, and you don't have to stay locked into that change either. There's always room for movement. And I think that can feel scary when, time is of the essence, and it can feel like you're running out of time. But I think it's always worth feeling comfortable. I mean, this is your body. This is your future. I think this is something that is worth investing that time to feel really heard.
And along those lines, you can also bring those concerns, hopefully,
Yeah.
to the doctor that you
Yeah.
do have,
Yeah.
and to say, listen, like, I want to know more about this. I want to hear more about this. This is what I need. This is what I want. And I think it's even more telling if a doctor is hearing that from a patient and they're not doing it, or they're not providing it, right? And having those conversations, because for sure, there's all kinds of patients out there. There's all kinds of doctors out there. Some patients want more information. Some patients want less information. Some patients want all the details. Some patients don't want any detail.
That's so true. Yeah.
And it's and totally fair, right?
Yeah.
But as a fertility doctor, the more you tell me about what you want, what you need, the better I can tailor my approach. I like to think I'm pretty good at picking up on people's nonverbal cues and trying to get a sense of people. But like, no one's perfect, right?
Alex and Kevin, when you came to me, you had heard the term donor egg peripherally, but it's not something that you really wanted to explore when we first met. I looked at your situation and I said, no, I think there's still potential here to use your own eggs. Yes, there's all of these issues, but that doesn't mean that we have to go straight to donor eggs. We can do all of these things. And I don't remember, but we did a few more cycles.
Yes, we did actually 4 rounds of IVF. Yeah.
4 rounds of IVF.
Yeah.
And then we did some transfers and we did some immune testing. And then eventually, after doing all of that, you came to the conclusion that you were ready to pursue donor eggs. Tell me about that process in both of your minds, going from like, I have a new doctor and I have new hope that I can conceive with my own eggs, to I am now fully invested, because it has been the witness and seeing you from the outside. I think that was so interesting, the way you were very invested into your own eggs, and then you became very invested into your donor eggs. I don't remember a lot of back and forth there. It's like, now this is how I'm going to have my baby. And I thought that was really interesting. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
You should start.
Yeah, it was a very long process. So from the time that we started trying to have a baby to having our son, Robin, it was just close to 6 years. So that's a very long time. And I think we were in this category of people, and not everybody who goes the donor egg route is able to try with their own eggs or has eggs to try with. So we were in that category of people who I had some eggs, we were able to make some embryos. And so when it came to you, I was really encouraged to try with my own eggs. I thought this is a really fresh perspective. But I think with that first failure at our other clinic, with that first transfer, I think there was something in my mind that was like, I'm not sure your eggs are going to work. And of course, having a failed transfer is very devastating. It's such a hard thing to go through. And then to kind of have them back to back. So we did 5 transfers with my own eggs, and none of them were successful. We didn't get a positive pregnancy test on any of them. And so I think to sort of compound those failed transfers, it really reinforced in my mind that maybe this was not going to happen with my eggs. We had done some testing with Kevin's sperm. It was A+, top quality. And, egg quality, of course, as doctors, you can speak to this, but it's much harder to diagnose an egg quality problem, right? I know you talked about this on your podcast. And so as a doctor, there's all of these things that you can try, but at the end of the day, we had embryos that were PGA tested, but I think you said it really beautifully. You said that eggs have an energy, and there's a certain amount of energy in the egg, and sometimes it doesn't have the energy to become an embryo or to become a baby, to become a viable pregnancy. Along the way, I had 4 major keystone moments for me, and I can talk about them. And one of them happened pretty early. I was still at our other clinic, and I saw a wonderful naturopath. I saw her the whole time through our whole journey, even through pregnancy. And she said early on, she said, this might come to the decision of, do you want to be related to your baby or do you want to be pregnant? And I think you should think about that decision. And her office was on the 5th floor of a medical building. And by the time I was on the ground floor, I knew I wanted to be pregnant, if at all possible. So I knew that for me, it was going to be ultimately more important to have the experience of pregnancy than it was to be related to my baby. I'm a very indecisive person. I whiffle, I waffle, I go back and forth. But that was something that was very clear to me right away. And then, of course, I filed it away and we did a lot of other things. And then later on, we were very seriously considering donor eggs at this point. And I shared with my parents, I'm very close to my parents, and I shared with them, I think Kevin and I are exploring trying donor eggs to have a baby. And my mom said, well, honey, are you sitting down? Because I have something to tell you. Your father and I used a sperm donor to conceive you. And so I was 36, 37, actually. I always say that it was shocking, but not surprising, because as a kid, I would pepper my parents with questions. Like, I don't know. It was weird. Like, they always said, no, you're related. I thought maybe my mom had used a surrogate. I thought I was adopted. I entertained all these like wild childhood theories. And so it was interesting to find out that actually my parents did use a sperm donor. That was very shocking. And of course, it took some time to acclimatize, but pretty quickly, like within a few weeks, I just remember thinking, oh man, like this is going to work out great for me. I can have a donor egg baby. I can do this. I'm very close to my father. I actually feel like we share a lot of things. We share a sense of humor. We swear far too much. I inherited a lot of my values, like the things that I really care about, I think are from my dad. So I thought, yeah, this is great. If my dad can do it, I can do it too. So I think from that moment on, I was much more comfortable with the idea of donor eggs and not just comfortable with this idea of maybe this is a really good fit for me. My parents did it. I can do it. It's going to be a really unique perspective that I'm going to have that not all other donor parents have. And so that started to feel really good. And then around that time, I started to shift into having more success envisioning a baby with donor eggs than with my own eggs. And it isn't that I didn't hope that, like, I obviously hoped it would work. We did those transfers. I didn't want them to fail, but I had trouble envisioning those embryos becoming a baby. And with donor eggs, it felt much more possible. And so that started to really shift. And then the third moment was, again, much later, like sort of years are passing between these moments. And we were fully invested in donor eggs. We had done our last round of IVF. I had felt very good about moving on to donor eggs. In fact, with our last round of IVF, we didn't get any embryos. We had to cancel it. I had ovulated early. And I remember you called us, Dr. Garcia, you're so great. And you said, I know this is not what you wanted. And there was this pause, and I actually was thinking, you know what? This is great. I don't have to go through with the retrieval. We ordered a ton of takeout. We sat on the couch that weekend, and I remember just feeling so relieved. And I think that was really the beginning of me starting to be a little nicer to my body. She had worked so hard for me. I had injected all of these drugs. I had done all these treatments. And I started to think of it like preparing my body for pregnancy, but I was going to get help with the initial step. And so I started to be a lot kinder to my body. I started to work out again. I started to eat a little better. I started to feel less restrictive about what I could and couldn't do because I started to feel like this was possible. So we knew we were going to do this. We had thought a lot about the route we wanted to go, the kind of egg donor we wanted to have, or the kind of egg donation we wanted to do. We went to a meeting. It's an organization called Donor Conception Canada, and they're amazing. They're really wonderful. I tell everyone about them. They're a nonprofit organization in Canada, and they have support groups for every kind of donor conceived kids. They have intended parents, single moms, single dads, queer donations. They have it all. So we went to this meeting, and we had met with all these other families. And I think probably the last hang up for me was I didn't know how I was going to do this until 18. Like, how was I going to parent this baby? How was I going to talk about egg donation? How was I going to talk about all this stuff? And then when I got to the meeting, the parents were so great and they were so candid, and like nobody has anything figured out. This is the secret that parents don't tell you, is that we're all winging it. Parents don't know what to do. You just kind of figure it out as you go along. So once we went to this meeting, and I thought, okay, great. These parents, they don't have all the answers, but they're listening to their kids and they're parenting their kids and they're kind of figuring out, and, just within that meeting, there was so many different ways in which parents were sharing that their kids were created via sperm or egg or embryo donation. So that was great. So we went out for lunch and I said, oh, Kevin, I'm all in. I think we're ready to do this. And then many more months had passed. And the final moment for me, which was the final piece of the puzzle, we had picked our egg donor, we'd put down our deposit, things were well underway. We were just actually finalizing our legal contract with the donor and waiting for the cycle to start. And so every third-party donation has to have a mandatory counseling session. And so the counselor that we met with was Dara, who you guys have had on the
Yes.
podcast, right?
Yes.
She's amazing.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
She's amazing. Yeah.
She told us many wonderful things. She had many wonderful tips, but one thing she said really resonated with me. And that was, she said, I noticed that you're wearing glasses. How do you feel about not having 20/20 vision? And I said, well, I feel fine about it. I wear funky glasses. I feel pretty good about it. And she said, there's room here to kind of explore this as a metaphor. Your eyesight isn't perfect, but you have a tool to help you see. And of course, eggs are not eyes and they're not glasses, but in that way, it really helped me to shift. And I think, okay, my ovaries don't work the way that I want them to, but my body works well. And as far as we know, everything about my body is healthy and I will be able to carry a pregnancy. And so that really helped me get into that final mindset of, I need help with this one aspect, but I'm actually going to do the rest of the work. And this is my baby. I need help creating the baby. And so I always use the image of painting. I see that our egg donor provided all the materials, the canvas, the paints, the paintbrushes. And, Kevin also provided a very critical part of that. But I painted the picture. And that baby carried in another uterus would be a different baby. It's a real joint effort.
I love that so much. And I have to admit, I've been doing this for over 15 years now. And it was you who taught me something that I have continued to use on my patients ever since I met you and we had that conversation. And it's something that I knew, but I never actually said it in words. And I think after meeting you and talking, I now actually say, which is the concept of like, we are using a donor eggs, but your body's perfect. Your uterus is perfect. So intellectually, I always knew that because you as a doctor, you know the mechanics, right? But I never actually made it a point to really highlight it like the way that Dara did it and the way that you explained it to me. I can't speak for other patients that come after you, but I feel like it's really helped so many other patients because they're like, oh, okay, I work. I function. I can do this. It's just one piece that they're being, provided. Everything else I can do. I think that's really powerful. And it was you who taught me that.
Oh, that's so nice. That's such a nice moment. I think that self-esteem is so hard in infertility. I mean, as you know, but it's really hard to absorb. It's a disease, but it's invisible. Like you walk around and you are healthy externally, but there is something wrong that is preventing you from conceiving. And I think if it comes down to being an egg problem, just speaking personally, I felt so much shame and I felt so much guilt and I felt very broken. And so I think that whole idea of that the one piece doesn't work, but the whole picture is functioning well. I think that was very helpful to kind of visualize. Yeah.
I have to say, I love that metaphor that Dara gave you with the glasses, and I'm going to steal that, and I'm going to use that.
I steal, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic analogy, and I say something along those lines, something similar to patients. I'm going to steal about the glasses because I love that. Just like if your child needs glasses, if you see another adult and they need glasses, you don't blame them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't say, oh my goodness, how is it that your eggs or how is it that your eyeballs don't work?
Yeah. You better be blind for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And on the same side, you cannot will your eyes to suddenly focus better, right? And along those same lines. Just like, yes, you can take vitamins, you can take supplements, you can do the lifestyle stuff, the diet, the exercise, the sleep, all the things. And then we've got, our medications and we've got our things. But it's not a personal failing. It's not a personal responsibility, to stay with this analogy, that your eyes don't work.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's just the way it is. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. And when it comes to fertility, and when it comes to ovaries, and when it comes to eggs. But when it comes to eyes, we say, well, this is your vision. You need glasses. We're actually much more accepting of that. And I think that's very interesting that somehow we are more accepting of needing this external help, the glasses, versus maybe being less accepting and less kind to ourselves when it comes to our ovaries not working, or maybe the uterus not working, or maybe it's the sperm's not working, or maybe there's just some unexplained factor. And I think that that's a really interesting food for thought.
Yeah. I talked a little bit about feeling guilt. And I think that
Mhm.
it's like, I don't know, it's sort of a bad environment because the internet is a little bit ripe with like solutions to a problem. And sometimes it is as simple as changing your diet. And that does work for some people. But I think for a much larger set of the population, like I went down this really punishing route. Like I cut out certain food groups. I took Chinese herbs and all these other things. And I did all of these added on therapies that I was trying to fix this problem that, to use the analogy, like I needed the glasses, but I was trying to do all these other things. And it was so punishing. I mean, ultimately, it really wasn't something because it wasn't my fault and it wasn't something I could fix. That was really hard, probably, I think, for you to watch me do all these extra things. And then you do these extra things, think, okay, well, if I cut out vegetables, then, well, I didn't cut out vegetables, but if you cut out this group of foods, then this is somehow going to fix your fertility. And I think that that's the kind of thing that just really adds on to the self-blame, because when it doesn't work, because it's never going to work, you blame yourself and you think, oh gosh, I did this thing and it didn't work. It's me. And so it's just kind of this compounding problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Alex and Kevin, being your doctor, I could tell that you had a really strong relationship. You came to the appointments together most of the time. I could see the eye contact. I could see your concern for each other. And I didn't know you had such a nice love story. I'm learning that on the podcast. So, can you talk a little bit about how this long, long journey and these big decisions affected your relationship and how you interacted with each other and supported each other?
We went into this journey with the benefit of having known one another for a long time and feeling as though our foundation was strong to begin with. And I think that was definitely a good start because we had a lot of bumps along the way. And because I think infertility is something that really it's sort of a gut punch on multiple levels, right? It's a punch in terms of hitting us where we really want something. And I think the desire to have children is so deeply ingrained in so many of us that it's a very difficult thing to contend with when there are barriers to it. But at the same time, I think the process of trying to overcome that journey is filled with so many unknowns for us and so many mysteries. And there's so many things, as Alexa was pointing out, in terms of whether it's your diet or this, where whether they lead to the outcome that you want is not clear at all. And so I think it's kind of ripe for just spiraling because you're always trying to think of things that can help your journey, even though there's so many aspects of it that are ultimately out of your control. And I think that one of the things that we really struggled with early on, and I think we got better at it, we definitely needed to practice it later on in our journey. But
As you'll hear later. Yeah.
one of the things that we had to figure out was how we both deal with uncertainty and how we deal with the idea of this thing that we both want, but we don't know how to get there. And the first thing that we realize is that we both process those kinds of things in different ways, and really acknowledging the fact that we are different people with different things that are helpful for us. And then, sometimes painfully, but just always coming to the table and being like, hey, what is it that you need? What is it that I need? In an imperfect way, how can we actually come and try to meet as much of that as possible? I'm speaking of it as though it was like an easy, let's have a meeting about how do we do this. But it's one of those things that just arises organically or naturally, or starting with like lots of feuds and things like that. So just to give you an example, Alexa is, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but you're someone who looks ahead, like 20 steps ahead into the future and has sort of plans of action.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm exactly the same way.
As you can probably tell. And that is something that has served us really, really well. And I am someone who is very kind of like, again, not to exaggerate, but I'm sort of in the present moment, and I try as much as possible to practice some kind of acceptance of the moment. And I think that both of our methodologies or just instincts came to use at different points of our journey, but they were also weaknesses at different points, right?
Right.
So
right.
I came in very naturally optimistic because I was like, I think this is going to work out, and if it doesn't, well, we'll figure, like, I have to like zen my way around it. But there were points where that was really difficult. That hit me really hard because I was like, when a particular transfer failed, I realized that all of my instincts were incorrect in that moment. And then there were other times where for you, it was like the strategies that you were putting forth were not necessarily getting you to that outcome, but it was just kind of a way of exerting control over that situation.
Right.
And I think we had to kind of modulate one another a
Yeah.
little bit, again, making it sound as though this was an easy process. But over the years, I think we really had to get a little bit better at doing that in order to see the end goal of
Yeah.
a pregnancy on terms that neither of us had initially imagined, but that we thankfully both became very not only comfortable with, but we actually got quite excited about it. And I think that was, I think when I started to feel excited about donor eggs, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to hang on to that feeling because that's an indication that something is going well.
When did you first get excited? Like, when was that you were?
I think it was after the donor conception meeting that you
Yeah.
had just mentioned.
Yeah.
And we were sitting at a Moxie's.
Oh, yes, for lunch.
And I had never thought of donor eggs as a possibility at all. And in fact, you know, one of the differences also between me and you is that for me, I had to let go of the idea that my child would be genetically related to my partner, which is very difficult as well in sort of a different way. Whereas you got to see me being part of that.
Yeah.
The whole. But it comes back to redefining what your dream ultimately is, because there's so many components to it.
Yeah.
And recognizing that some of those components are actually flexible. Realizing for me that, you know, genetics is one component, but it is by no means the only one. And
Of
a
course.
child is a child, and family is family. And
Right.
so, but all of those are loaded with expectations and definitions. And so
Right.
a lot of what made us excited and comfortable was kind of just rejigging those expectations and definitions a little bit. And some of them came from just intellectualizing it, and some of it just came from, oh, seeing that family right there, just seeing a concrete example of that family and being like, that looks like a totally normal family. I don't know why it wouldn't, but it had that moment of clarity, and you're like, oh, this is completely fine, you know? And that made it fine in my mind too.
Right.
I think we really leaned into later on. I think learning to disagree is such a great thing. And of course, this is the benefit of hindsight. We have our child, we have our son, but one of the advantages for it to take so long, we got comfortable with donor eggs on a bit of a different timeline. I got comfortable before Kevin, and I was sort of more ready to move forward. And it was about 2 years between me really like being ready to go from the time that we actually wrote, you know, and sort of initiated the process. And at the time, I remember feeling really frustrated that we weren't on the same timeline. But actually now, of course, that timeline was very beneficial to me because it did two really wonderful things. It gave us the opportunity to really explore every option with my own eggs. I think that a lot of women and a lot of patients, unfortunately, leave infertility not knowing what the problem was. And I think we kind of really got it as definitive of an answer as you can get, you know? So that was a very important closure for me. And I was really able to invest in this idea. We did a couple more rounds of IVF than maybe I would have. I mean, I obviously wanted them to work, but I was already had this donor eggs in my mind. And it was this really nice beacon of like kind of next step that I could think about, you know, if things weren't going so well with my own egg IVF. And then the second thing that it did was it just really gave me time to invest in this idea and not just accept it, but to really move forward and be excited. I have met with a therapist weekly for many, many years, and it's been very beneficial to me, you know, in dealing with infertility. But she said, and I was talking to her like initially about it, and I said, oh, it's just so unfair. You know, I'm young and I'm healthy, and I don't understand why I won't be able to have a baby with my own eggs. And she said, you know, she did a lot of work in the infertility space, and she counseled a lot of same-sex couples who were moving forward with the adoption process. And she said when she was just starting out in her therapy practice, she hosted these group sessions, and they would be for parents considering adoption. And she said she could always split the group into two parts. And it was heterosexual couples who were coming to that space just devastated. And it was really like a second option. And same-sex couples who were coming into this space super excited because they were about to have a baby and they didn't have the baggage of that infertility experience. And they were like, yes, a baby. And she said, obviously this is not, and I'm oversimplifying, of course, it's not to invalidate that heterosexual couples experience at all. But she was just saying, let's try to bring some of that enthusiasm to donor eggs. And rather than thinking of it as like a what's the word I'm looking for? Rather than
Well, a backup.
than thinking of it as a backup,
Second option. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking of it as a second option, what if it's the first option? What if that's actually how you're going to have your family? And that's the best route to
Yeah, I think when
doing
donor
it.
eggs became a front up for me,
Yeah.
that was like, yeah,
Yeah.
I felt like we were in a good space at that
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
That's really interesting insights into how you got to the decision to proceed with donor egg, because I see a lot of patients where I can see the wheels turning in their head essentially. Let's say when I start the conversation about donor egg, and maybe I introduce it first, and then maybe we bring it up again a second time. Maybe then the patient brings it up to me, and it is sort of this journey that I can see patients go down. One of the questions that I get often asked is, how do I pick a donor? And so, what do you have any insights? How did you kind of go about picking a donor? What would your advice be to somebody, let's say, in a similar situation?
I had the enormous benefit of talking to a couple of other patients from Markham Fertility. I was able to connect with them who were further along in the donor egg process than me. And so I was able to ask a lot of really intense questions that they could provide answers to. And I think one of the benefits to waiting was that we actually kind of got to explore different options. And there's sort of two basic types to egg donation: frozen egg donation, where the eggs have already been retrieved and you would be getting those eggs, or there's fresh donation, where you are picking a donor to either go to your clinic or a different clinic and then to retrieve those eggs. So kind of like the elevator, I knew that I wanted to go the fresh donation route. I knew I wanted our donor to be well taken care of. I wanted our donor to do her cycle at Markham Fertility. I had heard, sometimes maybe the eggs are not retrieved in the best way, and you want this person is giving you this incredible gift. You want them to be well taken care of. I knew that Dr. Garcia and all the other doctors would make sure that she got the right medications and not too much medications, and that she would have as good of an experience as you can have. And so exploring that, and then talking about like the process and maybe which agency, because you can go with an agency or you can do it if you have someone that you know who's willing to donate to you. We did not have any friends who were young enough to donate. We knew that we wanted somebody who was open to the idea of a known donation, to maybe forming some kind of relationship with them for us and for Robin, and somebody who lived kind of close to us in Ontario. So that would be possible. I really wanted someone who had completed their own family, because it was really important to me that I not be taking opportunities away from someone. So when we found our donor, she just sort of had all these, it's so magical actually, like the process of picking a donor. So we decided to go with an agency, and it's a bit like dating in a way. Like they send you these pictures, so you get some pictures and you get some sort of basic information about these donors. And I just think, oh my goodness, what an incredible thing to do, right? To just put yourself out there and to just lay bare all of this really intimate information. I would have such a hard time doing that. And so we were looking at all these pictures, and of course, everybody seems like a great option, but some people stand out to you. And we didn't look at very many profiles. Actually, our donor was she was the third person that I looked at, and I clicked on the picture and I said, Kevin, get in here right away. And, and again, one of those moments that like I didn't waver on. I didn't have any second. I kept waiting for that kind of doubt to hit me and like to sort of think of problems. And I just felt very calm and very settled. And
I think like sometimes you say that you're not very decisive, but actually I think that in our field, as artists, we have a lot of permission to kind of go with our intuitions. And we often know that in the art world, in the music world, for example, sometimes just when something hits you, you don't have to go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out why. It just sort of hits you. So I had the, pleasurable but not very like easy to analyze experience of just being like, yeah, I think she's the one, and thankfully that seemed to pan out really well.
And I also want to say though, like in talking to these other patients, we benefited so greatly from hearing about their experiences. We had a very smooth process with donor eggs. From the time that we sent that initial email to our agency to pregnancy test was less than 6 months. That's very short, and it's not common to have that happen. But I do think that a large amount of that can definitely be down to getting that advice. I talked to some other patients who had such difficult experiences, and they were able to provide me with a lot of insights into how to not have that happen, how to pick a donor that will follow through, or how to pick a donor that is the right fit, or how to pick an agency that seems reputable. I think so. So we really benefited from hearing other people's stories, and then we were able to kind of distill that into picking all the best parts. I mean, a lot of it is luck, of course, too, but
Yeah. I agree with Kevin. I don't think you're indecisive. You're very decisive when it counts. But speaking of that donor egg cycle, that was a good cycle.
We
If I may say
I
so
feel like
myself.
you're pat on your own back there, Dr. G. Yeah.
I remember where I was when I told you how many PGT embryos you had. Like, I remember which intersection
Ah,
I was, like turning left as I'm saying out the words, and you're like, no, no.
yeah. Yeah, it was pretty intense. I mean, so coming from doing cycles with my own eggs, which we
Right.
were very fortunate to retrieve eggs, but we would get, one embryo. I think one time we got 2 embryos. Our donor helped us make a lot of embryos. I remember sitting
Oh
in
yeah,
the
we
I
said that
remember
before.
sitting in the room with waiting for the retrieval because it's a surreal experience, going to the clinic but not actually having to have any treatments. And it was such a oh my goodness, it was such a relief to me. I was so thankful to our donor that she was doing this for us. It was also so interesting to just sit in a room and not have my body to do anything but just to sort of wait for this experience. And then Kevin joined me afterwards, and it was Dr. Kanji who came in and she said, well, we're just waiting for the number of eggs that have been retrieved. And I thought, oh, I really hope it's 15 or more. Wouldn't that be amazing? And she came in and she said, well, I think there's 40 eggs, but I'm not sure they're done counting. So we're going to have to make a new plan for your PGS testing because if you send them all, you're going to go broke. So, I mean, it was,
Thank goodness. Yeah,
yeah.
you didn't send them all.
No, I'm always mindful when I talk about like making embryos is such a hard fought thing and I don't want it to seem trivial. It was such a miracle to me that we had all these amazing embryos and it just opened up the world of possibility. We're both only children, but we always wanted to have a big family. Of course, now
Yeah.
I'm older. I don't think we're going to have a huge family, but
Probably not that big.
probably not that huge, but
Not that big.
no, but it just reopened so many doors. And I think that with infertility, you also can get into this mindset of, I must be grateful. I must be grateful for what I've received. And maybe say that is having a baby and you think, oh, I must be grateful with one. But if your initial goal was to have 3 babies, then you almost feel like you can't complain or like, I must be grateful that I'm pregnant. And what if pregnancy was really difficult for you? It just opened up this world of possibility to dream again. And I think that was very, very enlightening. Yeah, I actually talked to you, Dr. Garcia, about this. I actually split my infertility into 2, I kind of call it 2 periods, like a composer. I had an early period and a late period. The first part of our journey was very difficult with my own eggs. It was very complicated. There was a lot of uncertainty and it felt very, very sad. And I think the second part, when we moved forward with donor eggs, was very straightforward. Like it felt, I did not have the apprehension that I thought I might have. I did not worry about connecting. There was a lot of ease there, which I think it sounds like it wouldn't be possible, but for me it was. And I think that for other patients, I think it is possible too, that you can move forward and change the trajectory. I think you were very helpful with this, Dr. Garcia. You can change the trajectory of your infertility experience. You do not have to be locked into that same way of thinking the whole time.
Absolutely. So you had a lot of chromosomally normal embryos, and we transferred the first one. And because, like I said, your body was perfect and there was no problem with your uterus, you got pregnant with your first frozen embryo transfer from donor X and positive beta, positive heart rate. You had a great pregnancy from what you told me.
Yeah.
Felt great, had a great delivery, and then baby Robin was born. And then that opened the door to a whole new journey.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a whole conversation for a whole other podcast. I was very, very fortunate to enjoy the delivery that I had wanted or that I had maybe envisioned, let's say, and we were just enjoying this blissful period of newborn. And I think I had expected, because conceiving was so difficult, I had expected pregnancy and postpartum to also be as difficult. So I was kind of waiting. I had heard other people talk about these really intense postpartum experiences. And I thought, okay, well, I'm definitely going to have this too. And I kept waiting for this to hit. And actually I was felt really good. And it was really wonderful. And that was good because when we took our son to his 8-week appointment, he was diagnosed with a very serious liver condition called biliary atresia. And so we were admitted immediately into the hospital. We were there for over 5 months. He went through 2 major surgeries. He ended up needing a liver transplant at 4 months of age. And so this was an incredibly intense experience. We were just so shocked. There had been no indication. Of course, biliary atresia doesn't show up prenatally. It only shows up after birth. And so it was such an intense time. Yeah.
And who became the donor for your
Yes.
baby?
So in a cosmic turn of events, I ended up being a match for our son. And so on November 7th, 2024, I donated part of my liver. And it's at Sick Kids Hospital. And so I went into the Toronto Gen and Robin went into Sick Kids and they wheeled my liver through a tunnel and We're very lucky that it took well. Robin is doing really well now. He's almost a year old, actually, which is hard to believe. He's big and strong. He loves eating and he's chatting. And
He came for a visit at MFC and
yes, he did.
he was
Right.
great. Everybody got to see him.
Yeah.
I remember you mentioned going through your journey with Robin. You said to me, we were in communication this whole time. You know, when the baby was born, you sent me a picture. I said, congratulations. And we kept communicating through the whole time. Then you told me everything that was going on. And I was able to connect you to some people I knew at Sick Kids to support you there. And then in one of these conversations, you said to me, you know, I think this fertility journey really prepared me for parenting Robin and the medical issues that he had, which was really interesting to hear that, because a lot of people might say, oh, I'm so unlucky. I have this fertility journey problem and now I'm having this baby problem. Why does everything bad happen to me? But your perspective is like, A, prepare me for B. So we could be the best parents for this baby with medical needs because we already know a lot about the medical system. We know about patients. We know about uncertainty. We know about communication. We know about seeking resources. So can you elaborate on that? I loved when you made that comment.
Yeah, I want to make it very clear that I didn't feel this way immediately. I definitely felt the first way. I felt, I cannot believe that I had to do infertility and now I have to do this as well.
Fair, that's fair.
It was so shocking and so serious too. With this liver disease, your baby declines so quickly. There's sort of no outward symptoms. And all of a sudden, I mean, you know, up until I think 20 or 30 years ago, there was no treatment for this. These children would die from this biliary atresia. It's relatively new that they have this treatment that works well, which is the organ transplant. And so as we came to think of it and as we were in treatment, you know, certainly how Kevin and I talked, learning to disagree, we had to have a lot of really intense medical conversations that needed immediate answers about how we would proceed. We were able to do that. We were kind of able to give one another the space that we needed and to support one another. And I think, you know, just practically in terms of like medications and scheduling, when Robin left the hospital, he was on 13 medications. And I thought, well, I could do this. I had a schedule myself. I can do this for my son. Fortunately, it's not permanent. The medications lessen as time goes on after transplant. And just listening to medical instructions, I think we were able to kind of absorb that really quickly, even though we're not medical professionals. And then I think it turn around and ask questions, you know, okay, well, what does this mean for this? Or what does this mean for that? Or do we have any other options? That was very helpful, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know what it would have been like if we hadn't had our infertility journey. But what I can say is that we sort of flipped into a kind of crisis mode behavior where we were just managing what had to be managed every single day and just doing the best we could for that day. Our scope, looking back, it was such an emergency situation with him that you can only kind of see past the day and try to do what was best during that day. There were elements of that infertility journey that we had practiced in a way for that. And I have to say, it was such a stressful and horrible time in so many ways. One of the weird positives of that initial emergency period was I never really felt as though we were unlucky. I felt as though this was our unique challenge.
Yeah.
It was sort of like we were the people that had been chosen to deal with this challenge in whatever way.
Yeah.
And it seemed as though every win that we had, even the win of like, okay, we're going to have a liver transplant, because that was not necessarily in the cards right away. No. Had Robin been actually declining a little bit less, we would have been sent home. And then maybe a couple of years would pass and we'd have to go in and then have the liver transplant, which to me was actually a more difficult path in my mind. And so every single step forward that happened was something that I didn't artificially feel grateful for. I actually really genuinely felt like this was so great that we could have this.
Yeah.
And when Alexa was selected as the donor, she was a match and everything. It was just like, okay, we're going to be those people.
Yeah.
You know,
I actually felt very grateful for that too, because many children wait many months for a liver transplant. It can take a long time to find a donor, especially for an infant, right? It isn't just the blood type and you have to match in size. It is so fortunate. I was the first person that was tested. I was a match. I had always thought that Robin was meant for us and we were meant for Robin. We were always going to have the baby we were meant to have. But I think when that piece fell in, of all the embryos that could have been chosen, that was the embryo, you know? And I've actually never liked alcohol. I've never really been a big drinker and I didn't understand why. And it was clear to me, I need to have this liver that was in good condition to donate it. So this really weird, like cosmic turn of events, you know, my son, who I'm not genetically related to. We actually share a genetic connection. I obviously wish that we hadn't have had to have gone through that, but really, Robin really was destined for us. He was meant to be our baby and we were meant to be his parents.
And I just want to clarify, like for those listeners who don't understand the donor egg process or the liver transplant process, when you go and you're picking a donor egg, like we don't ask around what mom's blood type is. There's no matching, medical matching, quote unquote, that happens between the person who's going to be the intended parent or the person who's going to carry the pregnancy and an egg donor. The blood types and stuff, like they kind of don't really matter when we're talking about picking an egg donor. So then the fact that you were a match for as the liver donor, like this blows my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. As we sort of shared with, I think another great advantage to donor eggs was we were able to share with our medical team at Sick Kids all of this information that we wouldn't have had if we conceived Robin naturally, right? Like we were able to say, this is the medical information of our egg donor. We knew that she had this medical condition. We were able to share that. And that actually did sort of slightly change one of the treatment paths and one of the medications that Robin's on. And they were able to know this. So it ended up being incredibly helpful. We had done a lot of genetic testing. And so we were able to quickly rule out a genetic component to Robin's illness in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do. We would have had to do more testing on Robin to find these things out. So it really did end up being an advantage for Robin and for us to be able to share it. And I think similarly, Monet'd say, I'm actually not related to Robin. So the medical team also was like, wow, what a nice connection.
When I first heard it, I could feel the hairs on my arm go up. No, seriously, I get shivers. Like the first time I got a shiver down my spine thinking about it, because that is blowing my mind. The level of cosmic intervention, kismet, fate, whatever you want to call it, divine intervention, you feel it in this scenario.
It really is. It takes me a while to wrap my head around. Had we proceeded with donor eggs sooner, we wouldn't have had that egg donor. Had we done what that first doctor had said and jumped into IVF and maybe done, endometriosis surgery as he suggested right away, who knows? I'm just so grateful. I heard other women talk about this, the donor egg route. I'm so grateful that my eggs didn't end up working. It has never felt more true to me. I'm just so grateful that Robin is my baby and that, for whoever did the choosing chose him to be our son.
Well, I think he shows very well.
Sort of switching paths a little bit here. It's very interesting that you are a child who was conceived by parents who had a fertility journey, who had their own infertility struggle. And it's something that maybe wasn't necessarily the current, let's say, generation of people in fertility treatment are aware of about their parents' fertility journey, whether they had fertility treatments or not. Going forward, though, for patients, for prospective parents who are going through fertility journeys now, how do you think parents should talk about it with their kids? Whether donor conceived or not, but in general about fertility and infertility, how do you think parents should talk about it? Should they address it? Do you think it was beneficial to hear about it? Do you think it was detrimental to hear about it? What's your take? I'm very curious.
I thought a lot about this. I've had a lot of conversations about this. And I think that the way that I found out as an adult, I think is actually pretty common for people my age. I think it was not standard practice. When I talked to Dr. Garcia about it, it wasn't standard practice. My parents' fertility doctor told them, you know what? It worked. You don't ever have to talk about this. He said, you can go home, you have your baby, and you never have to talk about it again. So they were following the advice of their doctor. And it was just sort of what was done at the time. I think now things are a bit different. We talked to Robin. He doesn't understand yet. We're very open with our family and friends about it. But I think that having the kind of both sides, I think there's a real element to really parenting the kid that you have. And I think just in that group that we attended, there were different ways in which the parents were telling. Some parents told early, some parents waited a bit of time. You almost have to separate out your own parental comfort from what your child needs. And I think that it's very child dependent. As that child's parent, I think that it is your responsibility as a parent to figure out what your discomforts are with it and to work through those so that you can adequately answer questions and that kind of thing. But I also don't necessarily think that the way that I found out really ended up being that detrimental. I think it's very child dependent. And the child that you have that's in front of you, you know that child best. And you're going to figure out, and you can kind of figure it out together. I think that the benefit of babies is that they're dependent on you for a really long time. And there's a lot of language that you can kind of work out and the story that you can work out before they really understand. And so then you can get comfortable. A lot of the telling that I told Robin as a newborn was so that I could kind of feel comfortable with it. I think there's a lot of information online. My advice would be to take snippets of that, but I think my advice would be to just look inward and what feels right to you. And it doesn't have to be a one-stop thing that never changes.
Is there anything that you want to leave our audience with? I think of Alexa as Alexa 1.0, Alexa 2.0,
Yep.
and Alexa and Kevin 3.0.
Yep.
Is there anything that Alexa and Kevin 3.0 want to say to somebody who was back in the day starting their journey?
I think that with something as big as infertility, you're coming into this journey with a whole preset of loaded framework of expectations and dreams. What was surprising to me as we went on our journey was how good we could feel by just talking about what we wanted and realizing that there is flexibility and nuance in all of the things that we were talking about. And I know this is true of me, but once I started to let go of certain kinds of preconceptions, letting go of certain fixities that I assumed were fixed, whether through upbringing or just society, and letting go of those things were actually the most freeing things. And I think those were actually the elements that constitute growth on this journey that we're on. You were one of the few doctors who helped us kind of tap into that rather than it just being a medical journey of, okay, here's what you do, X and Y. If it doesn't work, too bad, kind of thing. Learning to grow in that mindset was really important for our journey, and then also for everything that came after that as well. If couples have the chance to tap into those kinds of things and to really accept certain things that we may not have been prepared to accept early on, but to understand the shape of acceptance and be open to that, it can be very transformative.
That's a beautiful answer.
I think that there are 4 elements that patients can apply to any kind of infertility related situation. But I think specifically, maybe if you're looking at going down the route of donor eggs, they are as follows. Number 1 is choice. There's not a lot of control in infertility, but I think what you do have some say in are the choices that you make. And maybe that's the choice of doctor or the choice of clinic, or maybe that's the choice of the timeline that you're going to go on, or the choice of donor eggs. But I think being deliberate in that choice can help you feel empowered and can help you just take back a little bit of that. I mean, I don't want to associate choice with success. Obviously, you can make a choice and it cannot work out the way that you want. But I think that having that say or how you proceed, I think that can help to feel empowering. The second thing is connection. For me, I learned of a personal connection. I think that a lot of people, you may already know somebody who has some kind of third-party donation, or maybe not. Maybe it's a connection that you make through the clinic. Maybe it's another patient or someone else that you have this personal connection, a personal relationship that you can rely on or ask questions about. It can be so valuable. It can teach you a lot about yourself too. And you might be able to take information from this person that you're talking to or a couple of people you're talking to, but it might teach you something new about yourself. And I think that can really help. The third thing is community. Surrounding yourself. Again, I mentioned Donor Conception Canada. I think they're a really wonderful organization. They really can answer a lot of questions and they're very non-judgmental. There's all kinds of paths to donation, and I think they can help to address that. So finding your community, maybe it's in person, maybe it's online, maybe it's a combination of the two things, you can feel a lot less isolated. If you know that there are other people around you that are in this similar situation and watching them have success, maybe that can help to foster that feeling of positivity or hope in yourself. The very last thing is compassion. I was talking about glasses and making that connection. I think that there's a lot of negative self-talk in infertility. And I think when we get a negative result, we take it personally. Flipping it just a little bit and taking a little bit of an outsized perspective, how would you talk about a friend or a loved one going through infertility? Again, this is very easy to say and very hard to do, but just any kind of gentle pivoting of the situation that you're in, having compassion for yourself and your situation, just starting along that road to forgiveness. So I've talked to a lot of other patients and a lot of other parents who are considering egg donation, and I hear a lot of concerns and a lot of big concerns. And I always tell people, the thing that you're struggling with the most right now, that's going to turn into your biggest asset. Let's say, as an example, you're worried that you're not going to connect with this baby. You are going to work extra hard to connect with that baby. That's something you're aware of. This is a positive thing. The things you're struggling with now, they are going to become your greatest strength. I guarantee it. When you go through this journey and you come out the other side of it, 1.2, 3.0, that is going to turn into your biggest strength as a parent.
I love that advice because I think it can apply to many aspects of life, not just infertility or donor conception. It's a thing that parents in general, even in fertility or not, in this community of parents, there's always like, I'm so worried about being too strict or not being a good parent or working too much. Like, if you're thinking about these things, that automatically makes you someone who's really trying hard to
Yeah.
do it right. You know,
Yeah.
that's great advice. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. This is so wonderful. It
Thank
was so
you
nice to
so
chat to you
much.
both. Yeah.
It's such a nice full circle moment from that very first appointment that we had to now you're here teaching me, teaching Dr. Wise, teaching our patients.
I think it also is really important to stress that it's very easy to give this advice now. You're meeting this person, but again, just to have compassion for where you're at. Infertility is a process. It's not an event. I think we can get locked into this idea of like, oh, well, I'm going to do this many rounds of fertility and then I'm going to stop, or I'm going to do this. And I think we can have this version, and it's a bit like self-protecting, but I think it's like being open to meeting new versions of yourself. Dr. Garcia, I'll always remember this piece of advice or something you said to us like pretty late into our journey. I think we were maybe deciding to do donor eggs like formally. And you said, the best part of my job, you think it's the babies and they're really great, but it's not the babies. It's watching my patients. Oh, this is going to make me emotional to talk about. It's watching my patients become empowered to make their own decisions. And you said that was something that you took home on the toughest of days, and you considered it your greatest achievement as a doctor, and that always stuck with me. Yeah.
Thank you for remembering that, because it's true. It's hard to explain that to people outside of fertility. And I'm getting emotional too, because I almost feel like I'm watching the most incredible movie ever. Like, I have this privilege of being a witness to the human spirit, to growth, to just people fighting for themselves and for the dreams, even if it doesn't end up with a baby. So thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Wise.
Music from Mixkit, Life is a Dream by Michael Ramirez C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.